Hello, everyone. Dr. Victoria Skirbo here, speaking to you from the Seeds of Transformation Healing Center in Wareham, Massachusetts. And today we're going to do a, oh gosh, what's the word I'm looking for? We're going to do, this isn't the word, but I'll call it an episode because I can't think of the actual word. Special topics for 2020. Of course, we know that the astrology of 2020 is very, very active. We're in the middle of some really intense energies right now. Today is the 7th of April. But we're going to talk about something that's happening in May. And that is the nodes of the moon are shifting from North Node in Cancer, South Node in Capricorn, to North Node in Gemini, South Node in Sagittarius. Now, just a little something about the nodes of the moon. Incidentally, if you see lights jumping around behind me or over me or such, that is the disco ball that I have hanging out on my pergola that shines all these pretty lights. So they're not orbs per se, although there could be an orb around. That's not from that. But what you're seeing is actually my disco ball outside. So now that that's settled, back in 2018, the nodes of the moon shifted into Cancer and Capricorn. That occurred on the 6th of November, the same day of the midterm elections in the United States. That was the day of the blue wave. The North Node in Cancer required us to feel. The South Node in Capricorn required us to let go of structures that no longer served, whether they were actual structures such as governmental structures, hierarchical structures, or they were structures such as thought forms, all the shoulda, coulda, wouldas that we spend so much time wrapping ourselves up in or tying ourselves up in knots with. And then, of course, the North Node in Cancer required us to feel and connect with our need to nurture and be nurtured. The Cancer Capricorn axis is the axis of security. In Cancer, it's emotional security. In Capricorn, it's physical security. So it's all tied up with our money, with our sense of self, with our families. A lot of family stuff would come up during this period of time. The nodes are generally in a pair of signs for about 19 months, 18 point something, I think it is, or 19 point something. Anyway, almost 2 years, but not quite. And the nodes of the moon are the nodes of the moon. And the moon is how, in a chart, is how we react and respond to life. We generally start through reacting to life, and hopefully as we get wiser, we start to realize that we don't have to react to everything, but that we can respond to things. And the difference between reaction and respond and the ability to respond is that the ability to respond, we first need to sort of back up from what we're feeling. Now, with the North Node in Cancer for all this time, we were definitely feeling the feels. Now, when the nodes of the moon are in a pair of signs, the ruling planets of those signs get activated in your chart. So what does that mean? I'm going to use Cancer Capricorn as an example, and then we'll move to Gemini Sag. So Cancer, the ruling planet of Cancer is the moon, okay? And the moon in a chart is how we react and respond to life, as I've said, and everybody does it in a little different way. The moon is the fastest body, has the fastest orbit. it goes through every sign of the zodiac in a month and spends about 2.5 days in a sign. So we all have various moons, of course, one of the 12 signs somewhere in our chart. So with the North Node in Cancer, what was being activated in our chart were our moons. So if you have, you know, if you have a good, what we call a good placement, I guess that's a bad word. We want to say good and bad. It's not really. Some placements of the moon are sort of easier, flow better. Okay, there's more stability in certain conditions of the moon, and other conditions of the moon where they're challenged. And so, depending on how challenged or not challenged your moon is in your chart, you will see that within when the North Node is in the sign of Cancer. You will, so perhaps the difficulties will become more difficult, and the ease will come a little bit more easily. The difficult part would be about you having to deal with it. You have to deal with whatever it is that you're dealing with your moon in your chart. Now, the South Node being in Capricorn required us to let go of, as I said, structures, thought forms, conditionings, especially parental conditionings. And of course, what would get affected in our charts is our Saturn. So in our charts, wherever you happen to have Saturn would be where you were challenged to let go. And depending on the sign of that Saturn is in, and what house it's in, and what aspects it makes, would depend on either how easy or hard it is to let go of things. Say you have a Saturn in Taurus, for example. Taurus is a sign that's not known for letting go. And so letting go of conditionings would be more difficult. If you have Saturn in Capricorn, especially because Capricorn is very powerful in, Saturn's very powerful in Capricorn, might have been more difficult for you to let go of some of the responsibilities that you had, okay? If you have, say, Saturn in Pisces. Now, Saturn is not very happy in Pisces generally, but letting go of things when you have a Saturn in Pisces is actually a little bit easier. So it sort of depends on what sign your Saturn was in. But all of us have been required through this period of time, from November 2018 until May of 2020, to both feel our feelings, move into a place of self-nurturance, experience the energy of our moon, become aware of how we react and respond to life, and then also letting go on the side of Saturn. Okay, so that's what happens when the nodes of the moon move into a sign. Now, the nodes of the moon are the future, the North Node, and the past, the South Node. So in a chart, the South Node will often describe your past lives. If you ascribe to reincarnation, it'll generally indicate what kind of childhood you had. If you have challenging aspects to the South Node, like say you have Pluto conjunct the South Node, we know that your youth could have been quite difficult. And, whatever, Saturn is there, things could be difficult. If, say, Venus was there, perhaps things weren't as difficult. But ultimately, we're moving to the North Node. And so when Venus is on the South Node, those things that bring us comfort are in the past. And yet it's about moving into the future. So, everything has its challenges, really. The North Node is the direction that we need to move into. Now, as the transiting nodes move from axis to axis, the last, with Cancer Capricorn is the axis of security. We are moving into Gemini and Sagittarius, and that's the axis of the mind. Okay, Gemini is the lower logical reasoning mind. Sagittarius is more of the higher mind, the intuitive mind. Gemini is the collection of information, the comparison and contrasting of information, delineation of facts. Sagittarius is what we believe. We take the facts of Gemini and we take them to Sagittarius and we create a philosophy of life. So what do we need to move forward to, and what do we need to move away from? So the North Node in Gemini requires us to listen, to speak, to explore, to be curious, to communicate, and to breathe. Okay? Gemini rules the lungs and the hands and the arms. Okay, that's what Gemini rules, and the nervous system. So as we move forward with the North Node in Gemini, we have to remember to keep breathing, which sounds like that's a silly thing to say, but take notice of your breath right now. Are you breathing? Are you holding your breath? Are you breathing deeply? Are you breathing shallowly? Sorry. I was holding my breath as I was talking, which happens when you talk a lot. So we have to remember to breathe. We need to support our nervous system, okay? Using, good, first of all, in order to support our nervous system, we need to figure out ways to reduce stress. Of course, breathing is a great way to do that. So maybe you want to start practicing some yogic breath. We need to support the nervous system, with different vitamins and minerals, and perhaps we want to look into foods or herbs that help support the lungs. Okay. It's a time for us to a certain extent, get our hands dirty, and that to utilize our hands, to utilize our ability to create with our hands, whether it's writing, typing, creating, cooking, whatever you use your hands for. Okay. So these are some of the things we're moving towards. What we're moving away from, or what we're being asked to release, is our beliefs. Now, our beliefs are some of the most difficult things to let go of. What we believe to be true. People will go to the gates of hell to prove themselves right, that what they believe is true, until they get to the gates of hell, and then they're like, uh-oh, maybe I was wrong. Many a war, if not all wars, are based on some sort of belief about something. So Sagittarius can be very broad-minded, but Sagittarius can also be very closed-minded. Sagittarius is often associated with fundamentalist beliefs. Now, I find it interesting at this point that, at least in the country that I live in, the United States, we are in the midst of a pandemic, and we have people, religious leaders, mostly fundamentalist religious leaders. Actually, the only ones I've heard of are fundamentalist religious leaders, who, while we're being asked to stay home in certain places in the United States, are saying, oh no, come to church and we'll pray together. We'll pray this away. See, that's the kind of belief system that gets tested at this time. So we'll see what happens with that group of people, right? But these are some of the things, like, this is so what we're going to be going through with the South Node in Sagittarius really is a crisis in faith. And so we're going to have to let go of some of our old beliefs while exploring other options, talking to people, talking to each other instead of talking at each other. Okay. Conversing back and forth. Oh my God. Okay. Gemini rules short distance trips and Sagittarius rules long distance trips. So we may see a decrease in long distance trips. Now that would make sense considering right now we're in a pandemic, and right now the traveling to other countries and such um, is going to be limited because many of the providers of air travel will probably either go bankrupt or there'll be a big shakeup, just like there was after 9/11. So we have that to consider. All right, so what do we have in front of us? Well, what we have in front of us is when the North Node moves into Gemini. And if we look right here, we will see this is the North Node. And the North Node's at 29 degrees, 59 minutes of Gemini. The nodes of the moon have what we call a mean retrograde motion, meaning that they move into a sign at the 30th degree of a sign, and they move out of the sign at the 0 degree of the sign. And so it starts at 30 and ends at 0. So when we say the nodes of the moon have moved into Gemini, they've actually moved into the last degree of Gemini. And of course, the nodes of the moon are always exactly opposite. We have the south node, which is what this is, in the last degree of Sagittarius. Now, this particular chart is a chart for the United States of America in that I have erected it for Washington, D.C. You can do this for your own area, but what might be more sort of important for you is to see where it falls in your chart, because where Gemini and Sagittarius, wherever that axis is in your chart, is where you're going to have to move in a certain direction and then also let go. So there's a taking in of experience from the North Node and a releasing in the South Node. And I can look at a couple of charts here and we'll see what's going on in certain people's charts. Okay. All right. So let's look here. So we're going to just keep this chart up because I want to point a couple of things out. Now, as I said, when the nodes are in a certain pair of signs, the ruling planets of those signs are what is activated. Okay, what is activated. So the North Node being in Gemini, the planet that is activated in your chart would be Mercury, because Mercury is the ruling planet of Gemini. And so if we look at this chart, we will see where Mercury is in this chart, because that's going to be important, sort of give a flavor of this nodal shift. And we have Mercury right here. Incidentally, in the chart that's erected for Washington, D.C., this is occurring in the 3rd house of communication. It's the natural Gemini house, but it is in Taurus. It is in Taurus. And so I'm going to read some. So I would look to see the aspects to this Mercury. I would look to see whether it's retrograde or direct. It is direct. It is actually in a new phase conjunction to the sun, but it is also Cassimi to the sun, meaning that it's within the rays of the sun. Cassimi means sort of like getting burned up by the sun. So there isn't a lot of, there's not a lot of difference between the sense of self and the mind here. Although the sense of self in a regular chart would take over. Now, I don't know, I'm sure there are some other things, sort of ancient astrology techniques that could explain this a little bit better than my understanding of it, but that's as I understand it. But one thing I do know for sure is that with Mercury in Taurus, the conversations that we need to have, the curiosity that we need to have is going to be around resources. It's going to be around resources. It's going to be around our relationship to ourself. It's going to be around things like the earth, right, and money, and our relationship to the earth. All right, now 15 degrees of Taurus. I'm going to read the Sabian symbol for that, and I don't know if you can see this, but I have this here somewhere else. Hold on, let me just let me find that Sabian symbol. Sorry about this, guys. I'm trying to do things. Okay, here we go. Is this the one? Yes. Okay. So when you look at a Sabian symbol, you it was at 15, I think 35. I don't have it in front of me, so I don't remember. So you round that off to 16. Okay. So the Sabian symbol for 16 degrees of Taurus is an old teacher fails to interest his pupils in traditional knowledge. The keynote here is the inadequacy of past knowledge in a time of crisis. Boy, are we in a time of crisis? So let me see what else it says here. It says traditional concepts are not adequate to confirm the new conditions of existence. Thus, whenever this symbol comes to a seeker's attention, it indicates that even the most consecrated tradition does not have the real answer to the problem. What's interesting about that is we have to remember that the South Node in Sagittarius is asking us to let go of a lot of sacred cows, right? A lot of sacred cows. The key word here is creative frustration. Let's see what it says here. From the Zen point of view, the mind facing trouble should not depend on past concepts, but should repeat, not this, not that, until pure void is reached. We might speak here of the principle of creative frustration. Okay, so curiosity and an ability to have an open mind is going to be very, very important. Okay, so let's look at the South Node now. 1 second here, I'm going to pull it up myself. Okay, so we have the South Node in Sagittarius, and the ruling planet of Sagittarius is Jupiter. And where is Jupiter? We have Jupiter right here. Jupiter is at 27 degrees 6 minutes of Capricorn, and so we're gonna sort of round it off to 28 degrees of Capricorn when we get to the Sabian symbol. So we do have to look and see what is going on as far as aspects. Now we knew when we look here, when we see Mercury is in a conjunction to the Sun, very, very close conjunction. Here we have Jupiter in a close conjunction to Pluto. Remember, we just had a Pluto Jupiter conjunction on the 4th of April. We'll have another one. We have 3. One is in November, I think, and the other one, I can't remember. Sorry, guys. I have videos on it. You can check it out. I should have checked, but I don't know off the top of my head. We also have a conjunction of Jupiter to Pallas Athena, the goddess of social justice and government, in 1 degree of Aquarius. And we have Saturn here at 2 degrees of Aquarius. So we have all of this we have all of this energy sort of connected to that Jupiter. So even though it's Jupiter and Capricorn, there's other things sort of connected to that that we need to take into consideration. The idea of Pallas and Saturn being in Aquarius ahead of Jupiter is an indication that we do need to sort of move in a new direction, not in the same old way. Now, let's look at the Sabian symbol for 28 degrees of Capricorn. And 28 degrees of Capricorn says a large aviary. Aviary is a place where they have birds, like it's generally a huge, like, sort of netted or tented thing, and all the birds live in there. So the enjoyment of the keynote here is the enjoyment of spiritual values by the soul, able to familiarize itself with their implications. It says birds symbolize spiritual forces, and the aviary presents us with a picture of these forces or desires contained within the mind, open to the light of the psychic or soul realities, and bringing joy and harmony to the consciousness. Yet the familiarity may suggest a lack of spontaneity and a thrill of discovery. To use modern terms, the peak experience it says, to use modern terms, the peak experiences have become those of a high plateau at which level one at which level one may lose one sense of direction at times. And it says here, the key word here is clairaudience, meaning the capacity for a being to be responsive to many inner voices. And so there is this sense of spiritual forces sort of being encapsulated in this sort of protective aviary structure, okay? And yet there is still a lack of spontaneity because everything is sort of set, everything is, and there's this sense of safety in what you believe to be true. And this is part of what is going to be challenged as we move forward, what things need to be let go of. All right, so let me get back to the chart here. All right, so I'm going to pull some famous charts up, and we'll see where what areas of life these people's charts are getting affected, just as an example. Okay, I'll be right back. Okay, guys, I had to pull up some charts, so I had to take a little break there. So again, this is the chart for the North Node moving into Gemini, South Node moving into Sagittarius. Incidentally, this occurs on May 5th, 2020 at 1:46 a.m. on the East Coast. For the United States, the vibration May 5th, 2020 is actually a 14.5 vibration, which is a Sagittarius vibration, South Node in Sagittarius, and it is the Temperance card. So part of the energy of this sort of moving into this period of time has to do with an ability to temper and to heal and to find balance. Okay, so when we look at it from the perspective of numerology and Kabbalah, this is located on the tree of life, on the path that connects the lower, our lower self to our higher self. So it connects the place of Yesod, the place of the moon, the foundation, with Tiphareth, beauty, the heart chakra to the sacral chakra. And so this is sort of connecting your heart to your body, your lower body, and it is an initiation, and it is along the middle path, and so it is the path of the mystic. So this is not an easy vibration. The Temperance card is one in which we go through trials by fire, and we become more upright, and we become stronger through our exposure to extremes without becoming extreme ourselves. So we'll see how that works for the United States. So let's look at a couple of charts here. Now, let's look, well, first, actually, let's look at the chart of the United States. We'll first look at how the United States is being affected. And thank you, my viewers who don't live in the United States, for letting me do this to the United States. So here we have the chart of the United States. I'm using the Sibley chart, which is a Sag rising chart. And so if we look at this and overlay where the nodes are, where the nodes fall, we have the North node here in the 7th house, and we have the South node in the 1st house. So for at least the first part of the North node in Gemini, the South node in Sagittarius, the houses that are being activated here are the 7th house and the 1st house. The 1st house is who we are. It's the I am house. It's the identity of the country. So what things do we need? What beliefs do we have about ourselves that we need to let go of? Could it be American exceptionalism? Could it be that America is the greatest place to live on the planet? We have a lot of things. Or is it, Americans are just fat and lazy? I mean, there's all kinds of things that you could say. I ask anybody who's not in America, and most people who are in America, what their ideas or their beliefs are about America and who we are as a country. And you'll get a lot of different opinions. A lot of that is going to be tested to be let go of. And we have the North node here in the 7th house. And what's interesting about the North node in the 7th house is that the North node in the 7th house requires us to communicate with our partners, okay? So our people we're in partnership with, that could be other countries, like the countries that are in NATO, but it's also the place of open enemies. And so this is a time for us to communicate with who we would at this point consider our enemies. So this is about opening up and listening, because it's the 7th house is listening, and communicating with others on a very sort of equal level, and deciding if the information that's coming in is valid or not. It's like we can't make a judgment on the information. We just have to take the information in. Okay, so that's what's happening in the United States. And then ultimately, this is going to move from the 7th house, and remember, it moves retrograde, and it's going to go into the 6th house, which is the house of the military. And then the South node is going to go into the 12th house, which is the house of self-undoing. It's karmic. So there's going to be probably towards the end of the second half of this journey of the nodes through Gemini and Sagittarius. First, we need to figure out who we are and who we are not. We're going to have to talk to people, communicate, listen, and then we have to sort of reestablish our military, and then also perhaps come to terms with some of the things that we've done in the past, and how our beliefs have created the issues of the past. And we need to sort of let go of that, and maybe to a certain extent be held responsible on that level. Okay, so that's the United States. Now let's look at Donald Trump. Okay, this is Donald Trump's chart right here. And this is the nodes of the moon right here. Now, in his chart, they start in the 5th house, and they are going to be retrograding back. They're not going to be in the 5th house for very long. The 5th house South node and the 11th house North node. Then the North node is going to move into the 10th house, and the South node is going to move into the 4th house. And what's going to happen is that his South node is in Sag, his North node is in Gemini. He's going to have a nodal return. His nodal return occurs on Election Day, 2020. So he's definitely going to have a place in the election. I'm not saying he's going to win. I'm not going to say he's going to lose, but he's definitely going to be a focus for the election. And so initially he has to let go of perhaps fifth house, some of his childish ways, his beliefs, okay, as he opens up the lines of communication to 11th house to groups. This is also the house of the Senate and or the Congress. So perhaps he needs to communicate with them instead of ordering them around. And then eventually the North Node goes into his 10th house, where he has to take responsibility for his words, and the South Node into his 4th house, where his past, okay, could possibly, he's going to have to let go of some things out of his past. And that could also be his tax returns. Okay, let's look at Joe Biden. Here we have, where are the notes here in Joe's? Sorry, Joe, I can't find the notes. Here's the notes. Similar to the United States, because Joe Biden has a Sag ascendant here. And so his North Node the transiting North Node is going to be in the 7th house, opening up to communication, talking to friends and enemies here. So that's good. I mean, if he does win the presidency, this is something that we need to do anyway. So it's reflected in his chart. And then sort of letting go of who he thinks he is. All right. And let's look at my favorite, of course, and I know you're waiting for this. Bernie Sanders. Where is this going? What's this happening in Bernie's chart? Well, initially, it's happening in his 8th house, the North Node in his 8th house, and the South Node in his 2nd house. But then very, very shortly after, it goes into his 1st and 7th. Bernie has a Scorpio ascendant. So for the most part, this is going to be in Bernie's 1st house and 7th house. So being open to other points of view, communicating to friends and enemies, which actually he's very good at, even though you think that, he's all about revolution, but, he's been a senator and a congressperson and been in politics since the 80s. You have to learn how to talk to people you don't agree with. So it's not like he hasn't done that. And then the South Node going through his 1st house is letting go or reviewing who he thought he was, or his beliefs, or what he believes about himself. So these are just energies that we see coming to fruition. Incidentally, the North Node will be on his Jupiter. The North Node will be on his Jupiter at the time of the elections. And as the nodes move in, we have Venus on his Jupiter, and we have Vesta on his Jupiter. So his ideas, okay, his beliefs will become core to a lot of the conversations that we have as we move forward with the North Node in Gemini and the South Node in Sagittarius. And so this is just a little something about the nodes. Where they fall in your chart is going to matter. If you want to know that, you can have your chart done. If you've already had your chart done with me, we could do an update. So these are just ways of seeing where you're moving towards and where you're moving from. So before we go, let's look at the aspects, let's look at the planets that are ruled by the nodes in these people's charts. We'll start with Bernie because we have him here. North Node in Gemini. We need to look at Bernie's Mercury. And Bernie has Mercury, where's his Mercury? Right up here in Libra, okay? Mercury in Libra is communication, opening the lines of communication, back and forth, in the 10th house. Very interesting. It would have been if he does win the nomination, which at this point is unlikely, but then again, it was unlikely that we'd be in a pandemic, so you never know. We could see that this Mercury in his 10th house would come in very handy in the next few years if he was president. Okay, South Node. We're looking at his Jupiter, his Jupiter. So he does have to let go of certain ideas that he has, um, either about people and how he relates to people, or just in general ideas that he has. All right, let's look at, is this Joe? Joe Biden. We're going to look at Joe Biden's Mercury. What is Mercury in Joe Biden's chart? It is here. Is in Scorpio in the 12th house. This can be somebody who has a tendency to tell untruths. Joe, is famous for lying, actually, but he's such a nice guy that it gets overlooked. He's kind of a jolly guy, and he can put on a persona. He has a Sag ascendant, so he comes across as a jovial, nice guy, but he's got all the Scorpio in a place in the chart that's very hidden. So there are things about Joe that we don't know. They do come out, and they'll probably come out more now that he's older, because as we get older, we tend to lose our filters anyway. So we're looking at perhaps for Joe, some things will come out, some things we didn't know about Joe coming out. And where is his Jupiter? His Jupiter is right here in the 8th house. Letting go of perhaps some, there could be family stuff here, letting go of family. He's had to do that a lot, unfortunately, in his life. And it could also be the 8th house is credit and credit card companies. So we might find something, having that information coming out. So there's that for Joe. And let's look at, sorry, that's Bernie. And let's look at Donald Trump. His Mercury, right here, and his Mercury in the 11th house, moving in this direction. This is going to be activated. Mercury is his ruling planet because he is a Gemini, and I would like to say that perhaps he'll actually start telling the truth, but I don't think he's capable. So I think we will start to see some of his lies, and I think I don't know, I know, probably. So that's coming up. And then what he needs to let go of, we have to look for his Jupiter, and he has Jupiter right here. Jupiter in the 2nd house in Libra. This is financial relationships. He's a very lucky guy. He has Jupiter here. It trines his Uranus, it trines his North Node, it trines his Sun. It's stationary, so it's very powerful. But with the South Node in Sagittarius, it's possible that he loses some of that luck. But of course, you know how I feel about him, so it's hard for me to be unbiased when it comes to this stuff. So that's what I want to say about this. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you get something out of this. Like and subscribe if you'd like a reading with me. Just contact me. There are links below. If you like this information and you feel that you're getting something out of it and you would like to donate to my channel, there's a link below for that as well. But I'm happy to share what I know. And we'll go on this journey of the North Node in Gemini and the South Node in Sagittarius together. Have yourself a great day, and I will see you soon. Bye.